Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Cosmic Echo, a Tay Leaders podcast. I'm Matt. He's Lee.
Hey, everyone.
And today we're interviewing Dennis McKenna. Specifically, we're having a story time with his ethnopharmacologic adventures in South America, and we talk about his book that he has out, the ESPD 50, or the Ethnopharmacologic Search for Psychoactive Drugs, 50 Years of Research. That was a mouthful, but and his views on how psychedelics and psychedelic research is heading in current times. It's quite an interesting story, and I think you'll be entertained as we were. So buckle up for story time.
Dennis, thanks for showing up on the show. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got interested into psychedelics and the research that you're involved in, and all of that information?
Well, sure. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be back on this show. I think it's been some time, and many things have happened since then. So, what am I? I guess I could call myself an ethnopharmacologist. I use that appellation. Nobody objects too much, and I guess I can lay legitimate claim to that. I got interested in psychedelics in the late 60s, mid 60s, like a lot of us. I was a child of the 60s and part of the counterculture. And, many of my peers discovered psychedelics and had experiences and moved on. But I never got over them. I stayed interested for all of my life, and I ended up doing my PhD on ayahuasca at the University of British Columbia. It was kind of a comparative study of the chemistry and botany and ethnography of ayahuasca compared to another very obscure plant called ukuhe, which was a more indigenous Witoto tryptamine, orally active tryptamine, completely different botanical sources. But the interest was that they were completely different botanical sources, but a similar pharmacology, orally active tryptamines. So I did that. The ayahuasca paper got a lot of attention, or a fair bit of attention. And the other one was, got lost in obscurity. It's still out there, but nobody paid any attention. So then after I finished my PhD, I went through about 3 postdocs, one of which was at NIH, National Institute of Mental Health, and Stanford. Then I worked for Shaman Pharmaceuticals for a while when I moved back to California, and moved to Minnesota. After their corporate culture, I moved into a different corporate situation at a Veda corporation, and so that's why I'm in Minnesota. But over the course of that period, I don't know what else can I say. In the 1990s, in early 1992, I helped organize a biomedical investigation of ayahuasca in Manaus, with working with the UDV and a bunch of colleagues, of course, and we published. It was the first kind of really biomedical study of ayahuasca, and so that got a fair amount of attention. And what else? I mean, I've been interested in all of these things. I'm Terence McKenna's brother, for whatever that means, and we published a little booklet in 1975 called Psilocybin Magic Mushroom Grower's Guide. And we mucked around. We brought spores back from the Amazon, and over a couple of years, we figured out how to grow psilocybin mushrooms. Very simple technique. And I think that was really the first time that psilocybin mushrooms became accessible to people with no particular scientific skills. I mean, any intelligent 10th grader could figure this out, and many did, actually. you know, it was amazing how mycology was like the science fair project of the year when this thing came out. So I think that had an effect on society. And we published it anonymously because we were afraid.
Yeah.
We're not afraid anymore, but we couldn't really take credit for it. Only later did it come to that. And then, in later years after I worked with ayahuasca, I became, personally involved with it, and as well as professionally, and that's continued. And I still work with it and do research and go to retreats and organize retreats and so on. And I still respect mushrooms very much, but lately my focus has been on ayahuasca.
Interesting. Yeah, man. A lot of people, I think, generally don't recognize that you have a lot of experience with ayahuasca. They kind of focus on the mushroom side and the psilocybin.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I read your dissertation on ayahuasca, and I was fascinated by the amount of information in there that people, like may have overlooked as well, like something that's written a while ago. I'm still learning from that.
No, it's ancient. I mean, it's ancient. Yeah, and these are scientific published papers, so not everyone even has access to these things. But I've propagated the message in other ways, as you know, if you take a look at YouTube and so on. And I didn't set out to become an evangelist for ayahuasca, but it seems like I am.
Yeah.
I mean, I talk about it a lot. I prefer the term ambassador. I mean, I guess I'm an ambassador to try to introduce this plant teacher to the wider world, and I want to do that for several reasons. Number one, it's been tremendously meaningful to me. I've learned so much from it, and there's not a day goes by that I'm not very grateful for ayahuasca, just in terms of what it's taught me. And not just the experiences, but the sort of the connections that you make through it, and the people you run into, and the places you go. I can almost honestly say almost everything interesting that's happened to me in the last 30 years or so has been one way or another related to ayahuasca. So, and I feel strongly about it. I feel that, many people can benefit from it, and they are benefiting, and it's kind of taking over the planet in a certain way. And I encourage that, because we need a wiser, more intelligent, ally to get it straightened out, because we're so stupid.
Yeah.
And the message is, with ayahuasca, the message is basically wake up, and start wrecking the place, stop wrecking this place, this planet, and, realize the limitations of your knowledge, and realize, how badly we've gone off track in terms of our relationship to nature and each other. It's interesting that ayahuasca, and I think a lot of these psychedelics, but ayahuasca is a medicine that is both for us as a species and us as a culture and us as individuals. I mean, it's a healing medicine that addresses what you might call diseases of the soul on all levels, and we're a wounded species, and everyone in this culture is wounded because of that, because of in the West, the traditions that have devalued nature and separated us from nature. And that's the big problem that we have. And so I feel that ayahuasca is kind of a catalyst to remind us of what we've lost, and in some ways forcibly remind us that we had better damn well recover it, or we're lost. You know, so that's where we are, and I believe that.
Yeah, there's a lot of great lessons to learn from those experiences, and it sounds like from your vast amount of experience that you've had, that you've learned some pretty dramatic experiences that we probably could all learn from as well. Um, you know, for somebody that's so passionate about their work like you have been throughout your years, what is something that, you know, like, what's the difference between you and somebody else that may have given up psychedelic use or not been interested in it? What drove you to continue this passion that you have?
Rather than give it up and
Yeah.
go into cost accounting or something. Well,
Well, I mean, there's money in pharmaceuticals, you know. There's definitely money in that, and you didn't do that, so.
I didn't do that. I did it for a while. Well, you know, multiple factors really contributed to this. It's not like I looked at my life and made a map of my life, and first I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that, and 20 years or 30 years from now, I'll be here. Many people can do that. I'm not one of those. I sort of stumbled along, not really knowing what I was doing, and I was very lucky for one thing. I didn't do any extremely dangerous things, so I'm still here to talk about it. I'm still relatively sane. Many people would disagree with that. I know, how I am, and it's just curiosity, really, that drove me forward, and I've never stopped being curious. And I think psychedelics, one thing they do is they stimulate curiosity, and that's what got Terrence and I interested in all this in the first place. It wasn't that we were seeking spiritual redemption or anything. That wasn't our mindset at the time. We were science fiction nuts. And it was DMT. DMT really got our attention. And it was like we felt back in the late 60s, 68, 69. It was very rare. There was little of it around, but Terrence was very good at working the matrix, and he was able to access it, and we did it, and we said, holy, holy God.
Yeah.
I guess I can swear on this podcast.
Yeah, that's fine, man.
But basically, we thought this was an order of magnitude different, more bizarre, more interesting than any other psychedelic at the time that we'd experienced, which was basically mescaline and LSD. That's what there was. And they're wonderful compounds, wonderful molecules, but DMT just seemed far more interesting to us because of some of that, science fiction-ish, other dimensional aspects that it has. The problem with DMT that many people run into, that we ran into, is it's so short. It only lasts about 10 or 15 or 20 minutes if you're lucky, and it's very hard to bring much back from that other than just a general sense of astonishment and like you've had this incredible experience, but not a lot of noetic content. So we wanted to find an orally active form of DMT, just thinking about it in this very naive way. If it could find an orally active form of DMT, it would last longer, and we would be able to get our feet wet more, or get our bearings in this place. So that's what set us off in 1971 to go looking for this Witoto drug.
Wow.
Nobody knew about they knew about ayahuasca, but back in those days, they didn't even know that ayahuasca was made from two plants and that one of them contained DMT. This all was surfacing about that time, but we didn't know this. So we went looking for okuhe. And we went to La Chorrera, and because that was the ancestral home of the Witoto, they were the people that had this drug, which had been reported in a paper by Schultes in the Harvard Botanical Museum leaflet. And the title of the paper was, Varroa as an orally active hallucinogen. So we know what Varrola was. It's the genus of trees that the snuffs are made from. So we stumbled on this paper, and the title may as well have been in flashing neon lights. It was like, yes, this is what we're looking for, an orally active form of DMT. This is it. This is the secret. So we set off to find it, and as like getting back to the issue of serendipity and how important that's been. So we go to La Chorrera, which is a whole story in itself, and we eventually end up there. And what we found in the pastures around La Chorrera was psilocybin mushrooms growing everywhere, Psilocybe cubensis. And we knew what they were because we'd done our homework. We had no personal experience with them at the time, but we quickly, fixed that problem. And you can read True Hallucinations or The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, or either one of those for the nitty-gritty descriptions of what went down. But in some ways, we really succeeded. We were looking for the perfect orally active form of DMT, and we thought it would be this ukuhe. And we didn't find it the first time in. It took years, and it was very disappointing. It was nothing to write home about. But mushrooms are the perfect orally active form of DMT. The psilocin is the active ingredient. Psilocybin is converted to psilocin, and psilocin and DMT are one atom different, right? And just different enough that psilocin is orally active. And it doesn't need MAO inhibitors. A lot of people sometimes use MAO inhibitors with it, but technically you don't need that. It's orally active on its own. And so that's what we got involved with. And at the time, we got very involved with it. And it sort of began to, I don't want to get too far down this rabbit hole, but the basic idea was that, we sort of started consuming it on a very regular basis because it was abundant in this area, and we didn't have a whole lot else to eat. We had brought food in, but figured we could buy food from the local people or the tienda. Well, they didn't have much else besides condensed milk and rice, so we could get those. But we started eating mushrooms. You'd be surprised how good an omelet it makes, or mushroom soup and that sort of thing. So we pretty much were in this place all the time.
Wow.
And it began to, not wildly intoxicated on psilocybin, but sort of in a low-level state of psilocybin all the time, which if you try it, it's kind of like microdosing, but it's more than microdosing. But it stimulates ideas, it stimulates conversations and speculation, and what we found was it kind of actually presented, you know how with mushrooms or ayahuasca you can get into this I-thou kind of thing where you actually feel like you're in touch with an intelligent being. Well, that was very much part of our experience when we were at La Chorrera. We called it the mushroom teacher. And the mushroom teacher had a lot that it wanted to tell us, and with DMT, you get that feeling as well. You get, some people encounter these entities. Some people don't. Some people encounter these entities, but the entities seem very concerned to tell you something. They want to teach you something. They have information to impart, and they're sort of happy that you're there. It's like, I haven't seen you in a long time, and, boy, have we missed you, and we have a lot to talk about, so let's get to it. Given that we only have 20 minutes, it's sort of like the fast forward, thing. Mushrooms are the same thing, but it's slowed down to a reasonable level. So you have a few hours to have a dialogue with this entity. And the entity was transmitting a lot of very strange ideas to us about kind of a biophysical experiment that we could do. And so we paid attention to that, and we tried to carry out the experiment. And in our state of mind, had we been in an ordinary state of mind, what we were trying to do would have seemed completely outlandish, But in our state of mind, it made perfect sense.
Yeah.
And so we did.
That's fascinating, man. So from your initial experiences that you had, with ayahuasca as well as psilocybin, what are some of the ideas that you had back then that today you kind of reject? You think about them being possibly like not true, and then what are some more recent theories that you've had that maybe kind of enlighten you or bring you to maybe a truth that you believe in now? So like what's changed in the experience over time, I guess?
What's changed in the experience over time?
Yeah, from like you're first taking mushrooms or ayahuasca, what these guides and spirits tell you things, and then over time maybe some of those ideas may become just ideas, and you kind of evolve and those ideas. So I'm wondering like how your ideas have evolved over time in those initial theories that you had and ideas.
Well, a lot of the ideas that we were playing with at La Chirera, like I say, seemed very outlandish at the time, and it suggested this experiment that we could do, which we tried to carry out, which didn't have the outcome that we expected, and which we wouldn't be here talking about it if it had. So we can probably all be kind of grateful for that, But it didn't have the outcome that we expected, for the simple reason that it would have had to overturn the whole structure of physics, and it didn't have that outcome. So as the years have passed, I look back on what happened at La Chirera, and really Terence and my life is defined in a certain way about pre-La Chirera and post-La Chirera. And most of our life has been lived post-La Chirera. The bulk of my life has been, I was 20 when we went to La Chirera. Terence was 24. And we were at that age where young men get sometimes, where they think they know everything and actually they don't know shit, and and that's a blessing in a certain way, because had we known, we probably wouldn't have gone. And sometimes you can know too much about a thing, and better judgment and caution steps in, and you say, no, maybe I'll step back from the brink. Well, we were not, we were ready to leap into the abyss, and that's what we did. But as the years have gone on, I've looked back at many of the ideas that came through, both to me and to Terence, during this prolonged period of kind of being in an altered state. And I actually have to look back and say, well, a lot of this was nonsense. It was just nonsense. At least in the context of the way we understand reality, it just wasn't. There was no basis for it, so I'm much more of a skeptic in a way. But I think that there were elements of it that were, that had validity, that were interesting, and I don't know. I think it's a story still being told. It's still being. I still take psychedelics. I take ayahuasca most regularly, but mushrooms once in a while, and I still get a lot out of them. I never have reached a point where I can say honestly to myself or anyone else, I'm done here. I've done this many, many times. I have nothing more to learn. Seems like I always learn something new, and so that's rewarding. My interaction with it now is not so much about, trying to explore this other dimension. I mean, if you wanted to, you could take DMT and you could get there. I haven't taken DMT for a long time, but but I probably will one of these days. But it's become more valuable to me in terms of the benefits I've seen to other people, and getting into the therapeutic area, where that's why I've been organizing these retreats, and also that really sort of stemmed out of the UDV work, because I saw how it worked for them. I mean, they're a church, they have a doctrine, they have all the problems that churches have, but on the other hand, they're a very functional society, and they're these are good people trying to be compassionate with each other, trying to be, respect nature, and just in general, they're doing their best to be the best human beings that they can be. And I hung out with them quite a lot when we were doing this study, and they invited me to join, of course, after a while. And I said, well, I don't want to join because I don't do cults. I'm not
Yeah.
familiar with cults, not so much into cults. But if I was going to join a cult, you would be the guy, join this cult, because it's a really nice bunch of people.
Yeah, it's pretty chill.
Yeah, but having seen the benefits of that, and then just generally working with ayahuasca in the mestizo community, and seeing how it's used to heal, and sort of live through the whole emergence of the whole ayahuasca tourism phenomenon, which again I probably contributed to some degree. Not really, not with any clarity. Again, this was a side effect, but it was just an accident. But I worked with Eduardo Luna, who's a very good friend of mine and friend of Terrence's as well, going all the way back to 1971. And Terrence met Eduardo in Florencia, his hometown, on the way back from La Chirera, and became his friend. And Eduardo Luna is an ethnographer who did his work on ayahuasca. And I introduced Eduardo to Pablo Amaringo in 1985. I met Pablo in 1981 at the end of my field work as a graduate student, and on the way out, on the way back from the jungle, on the way back to Vancouver, I stopped again in Pucallpa to visit this curadero that our first informant. And I just met this guy at a bar, and he walked up and said in perfect English, "Can I buy you a beer?" I said, "Sure." And he said, "I'm a local English teacher here, and I saw you. I thought we'd..." So it was just that casual. And that was Pablo Amaringo. And then we had a nice conversation, and he took me over to his house and showed me some paintings that he'd done, which were nothing to write home about. Nice landscapes, pictures of the jungle, this sort of thing, nothing remarkable. And so then in 1985, Eduardo and I went back to Pucallpa, and I introduced Eduardo to Pablo. And of course, Eduardo is Colombian, so we had some perfect Spanish. And then Pablo shared his story with us. I was not able to, I didn't have the Spanish to appreciate it when I was there in 81. So Pablo told his story about how he had been a powerful shaman, ayahuasquero, and but he had stepped away from it after a few years because he got into a battle with brujos and on a shamanic plane, and he was afraid that he was going to have to kill somebody or he would be killed.
Oh, wow.
So he stepped out of that whole thing. But he said, when we were talking to him, he said, Eduardo said, do you remember your visions? And he said, yeah, I remember them perfectly. I remember every one in complete detail. And Eduardo said, well, have you ever thought about painting your visions? You know, because he'd shown the paintings. And it's like you could almost see the light bulb go on over his head. You know, he had never thought of it. Never occurred to him to try to do that. So the next morning we went there to visit him, and he had completed the first of 4 paintings.
Wow.
That turned out to be this whole, the first 4 of hundreds that he produced. And he and Eduardo, as you probably know, they worked together. Eduardo arranged exhibitions for him in Europe and LA and other parts to have his paintings shown. And they worked on this book called Ayahuasca Visions, the religious iconography of a Peruvian shaman. And that was published by North Atlantic Books around 1992. It was a coffee table book, beautiful, high-res reproductions of all the paintings with Eduardo's explanations of what these symbols, animals, people, all elements of the paintings contained in English. So this made vegetalismo, which is kind of the broad classification of this kind of mestizo, ethnomedicine, vegetalismo. This made vegetalismo and the whole ayahuasca cosmology, if you want to say, accessible to Westerners in a way that it was never accessible before. You know, a few people knew about it, ethnobotanists, ethnographers, nobody really cared, nobody knew much about it. But that book, I think, was a catalyst in bringing it to mass consciousness. You know, in the same way, similarly in the way that R. Gordon Wasson's article in Life magazine in 1957 brought it to, the kitchen tables and the coffee tables of Middle America. You know, I mean, it had it didn't have the reach that article had, but it was really the first time that this completely exotic psychedelic became more widely known.
Wow.
You know, and people, I think people out of get this romantic notion. I mean, the other thing that everybody wants to, a lot of people in my generation related to the teachings of Don Juan.
Yeah.
I know it was a big influence for me, and even though I know now that it was mostly bunk, probably 90% of it was made up, didn't really matter in a sense. It didn't matter because it provided an ethnographic context for the use of these plants, which we didn't have in a culture before that. You know, we had Timothy Leary, and that's what we had. And as a culture, I think that's why LSD was so disruptive in our culture, because we had no context. We had no vessel to put it in. But then ayahuasca came along, and people that had, sort of been interested in that could see themselves going down to Peru and finding their shaman and, having this connection. And many people did. It started really, the tourism thing started in the early 90s, pretty much. I mean, there were a few people before that, but then it grew and grew and grew and went from a trickle to a flood, and now it was in full swing. It's pretty much still going on.
Yeah, it's full swing now, I'll tell you that, man.
With all the intended and unintended consequences that had, but overall, I think it's a healthy thing.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, it sounds like it took the paintings really to visualize, to give people the visual aspect to kind of enticed them to actually have these experiences versus just people writing about it? I know that when the first thing I saw on ayahuasca was Dr. Strassman's book on DMT, the spirit molecule, and I didn't even read his book at the time. That got me interested. It was the cover artwork that really enticed me to. I was like, "Whoa, what is this?"
Yeah. So, are you familiar with this book I'm talking about?
Yes, yeah, I've looked at it, yeah, before, yeah.
I mean, it's long been out of print, but you can find copies. But
Yeah.
I think that was really that opened up this world to a lot more people. I mean, by then, mushrooms had already pretty much made their way into our culture. They were common because, I mean, we introduced the mushrooms, but then a lot of people took them up, and of course now there are much better ways to cultivate them and all that. But it didn't really have the impact, or it didn't seem to have the impact on society that ayahuasca has, and I'm not sure why that is. We're comfortable with them, and I guess partly because people, they usually, I mean, you can take mushrooms by yourself. You can take it recreationally. And I think many people use mushrooms at fairly low doses and recreationally, which there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's a lot of fun. It's a pleasant psychedelic at a low dose. They take it, they may never suspect that just a few grams more and it will open up the screaming abyss. I mean, it will open up dimensions that are every bit as bizarre as anything you'll see on ayahuasca, sometimes more so. But ayahuasca is viewed in a different context. It's viewed as a collective thing. It's almost always taken in groups. There's the need to have a leader, a shaman or something, a facilitator, and a context, a set and setting, music, ritual, all of those things, and it's just viewed in a different way, and there's a lot of emphasis put on the social context and the person who's leading it, and so on. You don't get that with mushrooms so much.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about the negative consequences of like the mass amount of people knowing about these things, and I know you went through the 70s and had the experience of it being criminalized and everything like that. So I'm wondering, from your perspective of back then to what's happening today with the current research going on with MAPS and other universities doing studies on psilocybin and other psychedelics. How do you see that coming about, like in the future? Like,
well, I see that part of it as generally a very positive thing, in the sense that psilocybin is practically the perfect clinical psychedelic, in the sense that it's low toxicity, it lasts a reasonably short amount of time, but long enough that you can have a full experience, and it can be very profound. At the higher doses, it can be very profound. So it really lends itself to this sort of biomedical, therapeutic approach where the shaman is replaced by a therapist. But other than that, people have their experiences. And you can be ill, you can be dying and take psilocybin, and it's okay. You can tolerate that. And that, of course, as you know, is where a lot of the research is focused on, helping people, with the existential anxiety about dying and many other things. So I think this is good, that because if you look at what I sometimes call the psychopharmaceutical industrial complex, biomedical industrial complex in a certain way, medicines like psilocybin have the potential to completely disrupt that. And that's a good thing, because mental health care in this country is pretty much a joke.
Yeah.
We have a tremendous variety of these psychopharmaceuticals, most of which don't do very much, and you have to take them for, in some cases, the rest of your life, and they're not effective. The data's out there that they're barely better than placebo. Here you have a medicine that you can take it once or twice, maybe in a lifetime, and it will get to the root of your problems. It will actually cure things like intractable depression, PTSD, anxiety, all of these things. It will actually resolve those things rather than just paper them over. The other things are like chemical bandages. They don't really work. That is both a breakthrough in terms of therapy for these kinds of illnesses. It's also very threatening to the biomedical pharmaceutical industrial complex because these things are not patented, and they are, and they want drugs that you take 4 times a day for the rest of your life. I mean, that's where the revenue model is. There's no money to be made off the, although there are now people who are approaching it that way and trying to patent it in different ways. And I have, I am not sure this is the right thing to do. I mean, many of these people are close friends of mine, and I respect what they're doing, but I'm not sure this is what we should be doing. In the first place, with both ayahuasca and mushrooms, we've co-opted indigenous knowledge.
Yeah.
Co-opted these things. What are their plans to give something back to the indigenous people who have been the stewards of these things for so long? My guess is very no plan at all, and that's unfortunate. I'm not sure how you do it. The same thing is going on with ayahuasca, but ayahuasca is, it's almost inoculated itself against that kind of development because it's such a plant and because it's a combination of 2 plants, and you can extract DMT from one plant, you can extract beta carbolines from another plant, you can combine them in a combination that they sometimes call pharmahuasca.
Okay.
Pharmahuasca is interesting, but it is not ayahuasca. It's very different than ayahuasca. There's a bunch of stuff in ayahuasca that affects the activity. So if you want to take something like ayahuasca and stuff it into this biomedical model, placebo-controlled clinical blind studies, etc., you can do that with psilocybin because it's a single molecule. The dose is perfectly titrated, etc., etc. And even when you do that with psilocybin, it quickly becomes clear that this is kind of a stupid approach, because it takes about 10 minutes to sort out who got the placebo and who got the
Yeah.
So why bother? That's just silly,
Yeah.
But that's what they like to do. Ayahuasca doesn't lend itself to that kind of study, and I think that's a good thing. I think it should be studied in the traditional context, and we shouldn't be trying to make a pure drug out of it. We should work with indigenous people and know how to use this, and work on the protocol for therapy rather, and psychiatry and shamanism when it comes to the use of these drugs is they're not that different. I think psychiatry could learn a lot from shamanism in terms of how to use these drugs, and shamanism might be able to learn from psychiatry. So hopefully what I'd like to see happen is a fusion of these things and a transformation of biomedical psychiatry. In the first place, get it out of the clinic, and loosen up the regulations. Right now, I get a lot of emails from people. Well, where can I access mushroom therapy. And I have to write back and say, well, you can try and get into one of these FDA approved trials, which is closed to most people. You have to meet the inclusion criteria. You can try that, or you can look in the underground, in which case I will not talk to you about it, because I'm not going to encourage you to commit felonies, But I said, I'll be happy to talk to you if you want to go to South America, or you want to go somewhere else, because there these things are not restricted. And so I think this ayahuasca tourism thing, it's a little out of control now, but it is evolving in the right direction. I mean, there has to be goodwill on both sides to try to develop a therapeutic approach to these things that respects the tradition, that does provide reciprocity to the indigenous people, that sets some standards about, if you're going to go to these centers, they should conform to some basic code of ethics and so on. Because ayahuasca, psilocybin, any psychedelic or any spiritual technology, if you want to think of it that way, and I do, it's basically a technology, but any powerful spiritual technology can be abused and is abused. I mean, and so that's a problem. Just because you take ayahuasca doesn't mean you're a saint. And there are a lot of dodgy people involved in this. People that you would not trust, should not trust, that are involved in it. So that's the tricky part. How do you find someone, that you can really respect and trust, who will respect you? I mean, spiritual technologies are power technologies, and some people are obsessed with power. So obviously they haven't listened to their medicine, or they wouldn't be doing that. But so that's one of the issues to that have to be addressed. And there are others as well. I mean, the sustainability of ayahuasca, and I don't think it's far from an endangered species. I mean, I think a lot of it being grown, and I think there's enough of it. It will be produced to meet the demand. But you get Western culture with all their expectations and cultural assumptions and so on, coming hard up against these much more fragile indigenous cultures. And it's got to have an effect, or these, I mean, what happens, Peru is a country where, jealousy and envy are really a part of the social dynamic. So, you've got a shaman in a village somewhere. Maybe he was just a farmer before, and this was his day job. And, and he would do ayahuasca curing kind of on the side. Well, now all of a sudden he's a superstar, and he makes more in a night than most people make in a month or 2 months. Man. So that's a problem, And again, I don't know what the answer is, but I do think this has always gone on when you think about it. This is nothing new. We've co-opted spiritual technologies, use them for profit, use them to get, all the things that people want, money, recognition, sex, and all of that stuff. And that there's nothing new about that. But we, I'm a biologist. Basically my training is in biology, not anthropology. So I look at this from a biologist perspective, and looking at it from a higher perspective, this is coevolution. This is, we are co-evolving with these plants. They're giving us things that we need: healing, power, teaching, understanding, all of those things that we long for, spiritual meaningfulness. And we give them, well, we do what they love to do, which is grow. We grow, we spread them around. And it's been a pretty successful strategy.
Yeah.
Ayahuasca is everywhere in the world now, so it's escaped from the Amazon and it's everywhere.
It's pretty good for that plant and the mushrooms as well.
For that plant and the mushrooms, same thing.
Yeah, man.
So this is what I mean when I say, sometimes I say, one of the lessons I get from ayahuasca, more or less in these words, is remember, you monkeys are not running this show. The plants are running this show, really. And what is the show? The show is life on Earth. And if it weren't for plants they're photosynthesizing and doing all these things, maintaining the atmospheric carbon dioxide balance and all of and releasing oxygen into the atmosphere. Everything on Earth is basically a parasite on photosynthetic organisms, and lucky for us, they give these things freely. Problem is we're so busy pushing the envelope on all these equilibrium mechanisms, these homeostatic processes that keep the planet habitable, that these systems, as resilient as they are, they're in danger of being overwhelmed. And that is very disturbing, because really it does have to do with the, ultimately with maintaining this planet in a habitable, equilibrium.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, when the research and we start legalizing these things, that there also needs to be some type of equilibrium that will be produced, hopefully in result of that in some way, like once the initial push to legalize it and then everyone's interested, eventually maybe their interest will die down a little bit, and then people that really need it to get the support, will get the support, and then hopefully it'll mellow out, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is a long-term process. Evolution and coevolution works on much different timescales than cultural evolution. So hopefully there'll be some kind of a equilibrium reached, and the idea that these things should be illegal is utterly absurd, because they're so prevalent in nature. I mean, DMT is possibly the most prevalent alkaloid in nature. It's in thousands of plants. It happens to be one or two that is used to make ayahuasca, but DMT is everywhere. And I haven't seen any pushback on this idea. The assumption is that ayahuasca per se is illegal. It's not illegal. DMT is illegal. And then if you look at the absurdity of that, DMT is in your head, and it's in, and like Terence used to say, we're all holding, right? And we should turn ourselves in to the local constabulary for possessing a controlled substance, because it's bad.
Yeah, pretty bizarre, the laws, man. I agree with that.
By some things I've seen lately, like there's a couple of nascent movements to deregulate psilocybin mushrooms in, I think, California and Oregon and so on. That's the right idea, to just, I've long said, if they want to solve the drug problem, which is, a problem they largely created, but one way to do this is just say, we're not interested in plants or fungi where these things occur naturally. We're not going to regulate those things. Those aren't drugs. They're plants, and they happen to contain alkaloids that have this activity. But in the plant form, they're much less harmful, And when you start extracting, cocaine from coca or morphine from opium, then these purified compounds are much easier to abuse, are more dangerous, they're more toxic. In the plant, they're pretty benign. I mean, coca is a wonderful plant with tremendous amount of benefit for the people that use it. It's about as hazardous as green tea, and it's actually quite good for you. And it's a irreducible component of Andean culture. So isn't it kind of arrogant for us to come along and say this sacred plant, which has been around for 10,000 years, deserves to be eradicated from the face of the earth? I mean, who gave us the right to say that?
Yeah, that's bizarre.
I mean, that is just incredible arrogance. We're not talking about the smallpox virus here.
Yeah.
Maybe that should be eradicated, but even that you could debate. But the idea that these plants, I mean, they should just say, look, because that addresses the DMT issue. DMT is a controlled substance, but DMT in the plant is not. The plants themselves are not illegal. It's when you start to extract DMT, purify it, make it into a drug, at some indefined point there, you cross a line where you say, okay, now we're talking about DMT, a controlled substance. Before, we were talking about a decoction made from some leaves. That's different. That's not DMT.
Mm-hmm.
It's got DMT in it and hundreds of other things as well. So maybe that is a way forward, a way to look at the reasonable regulation of these things from a real perspective that reflects biology. Of course, that presumes that intelligent people who really want to solve this problem are looking at it. But of course, we know that's not happening. I mean, that's the whole
true.
Drug policy thing is run by idiots. So, it's a problem. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it doesn't. Some people, if they want to take mushrooms for therapeutic purposes, they'll want to do it in the clinic. They'll want to do it with a psychiatrist. Wonderful. That's great. If they can access that, that's great. Far more people would rather just walk into the woods, pick some mushrooms, and take them, and take it with a guide or not, but just get it out of nature.
Yeah, with a friend to help them,
Yeah, I think that's a much more reasonable approach, and much more sort of true to the spirit of the way it's always been done. These are gifts of nature. I don't need the FDA to approve my psilocybin. I don't need, USONA or Compass or all these things to patent it so that they can tell me I can't take it unless I pay to go to one of their clinics.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Screw that.
Man.
I'm not going to do it.
Well, hopefully, eventually, it will change to the better. We can always hope, right?
I find that a lot of the fear mongering behind drugs like these are due to a lack of understanding. So, talking about it and discussing its the real definable benefits is always a good thing in terms of consciousness about these kind of things.
Right. And people are finding out this. I mean, it's not just me. There are people like me talking, but then you've got people like Michael Pollan talking about it, and he has a much vaster audience. And I give him credit. I mean, there are things about his book that I am disappointed about, but in general, like, he hardly talks about ayahuasca, and I'm disappointed about that because I think he's overlooked a really important cultural phenomenon. But overall, here you've got a guy with a really stellar reputation, and he's coming out and saying, psychedelics are okay. Psychedelics are very promising. And a lot of people will see his material that would never stumble across my YouTube videos or a lot of us in the community. I mean, we are in kind of a bubble, unfortunately, and I think that is one of the things that needs to happen if things are going to change, is to get this message more widespread and get it in front of people who are really in a position to make a difference.
Definitely, yeah.
Definitely.
With that brings me to your book, man, that you released recently, dealing with the ESPD 50.
Yeah.
I can't say the full acronym, so I'm not even trying, but you can go ahead and take it away.
Ethnopharmacologic search for psychoactive drugs, 50 years of research.
Yeah.
That's right. The Ethnopharmacologic search for psychoactive drugs, 50 years of research, and available from Synergetic Press. Write it down, Synergetic Press. So what this was kind of a personal bucket list project for me to produce this book, because it's a commemoration of a conference by the same name that was held in 1967 in San Francisco, and it was sponsored by the National Institute of Mental Health. The U.S. government paid for the first conference. And
Crazy.
All the leading lights of the field at the time, Schultes and Alexander Shulgin and even Andy Weil, other lesser-known people, all gathered for this private conference in San Francisco in January 1967 at the UCLA, or UCS, the Medical University in San Francisco, which eventually became UCSF. But it was a private conference, and the only thing that happened that the taxpayer got for their money was the publication of this book, and which you could order from the U.S. government printing office for many years. Somehow or other, I got a hold of that book when I was 18 years old, and living in Colorado, wanting very much to be living in San Francisco, where Terrence was, or Berkeley. And that book was very influential in me, because I realized that there was actually a science behind all this. And that and the teachings of Don Juan, which came about the same time into my life, that gave me the ethnographic context for it. And so I read that book from cover to cover at the time, and I thought, this is just such cool stuff. And so for years, I wanted to do a follow-up conference, because the government was supposed to do conferences every 10 years or so. But the war on drugs came along. They were embarrassed that they ever had anything to do with this, so it never happened. So 30 years went by. I tried to get it for 30 years. I couldn't get it together. And then the 50th year, 2017 was the 50th year, and suddenly it all fell together. I had a place. I had support through the Hefter Institute. We put this amazing conference on. We live streamed it through Facebook. So the first one was a private conference, but this one at times was viewed by 60,000 people.
Wow, that's cool.
So that was a cool thing. And those videos are up there. That people can look at that, and they don't have to order the book, which is expensive, but of course you really want the book, right?
Yeah. It's a beautiful book. Definitely is worth the money. And one question I had was why you guys included nutmeg into it.
Why we included nutmeg?
Yeah, why I was interested to know why nutmeg was one of the plants in there.
Well, that was in the first book. That was
okay.
in the 67th book. And so this is the original 1967 book. I have 2 copies of it. This is my best copy, and this is the old, ratty, tattered copy that I bought. And this was a copy that actually was when I went to NIH to do my postdoc in NIMH. This was on a back shelf of one of the labs, the lab I worked in. I found it. It had never been touched.
Whoa.
Clearly, it was conditions. So that kind of quietly disappeared in my library. But why nutmeg? Okay, nutmeg, that was actually what Andrew Weil presented.
Oh, okay.
And he had been working on an undergraduate project about nutmeg with Schultes, under Schultes' supervision. So he basically talked about his undergraduate independent study work with nutmeg. Well, you know, nutmeg is sort of psychoactive.
Yeah.
I mean, and the reason it's interesting is that the nutmeg chemistry, myristicin, and these sorts of things are precursors for a lot of Shulgin's compounds. They have the right ring substitution patterns such that, you know, there's a whole slew of these what's the right phenylpropanoids, right? Essentially simple phenolic acids.
Okay.
And a lot of those, if you can just put a nitrogen onto them, then you've got this whole range of structures that Shulgin worked on for most of his life. They come from either nutmeg or related aromatic plants. You know, so he didn't have to do the ring substitutions.
Oh.
And that turned out to be interesting. But basically it was what Andy Weil worked on.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I was interested in that. So what are some other ways that people get a hold of you? I know you have some conferences coming up as well, like a couple in British Columbia, I think.
Yes. Well, how can they get a hold of me? They can always get a hold of me through Hefter. I should mention the Hefter Research Institute. Okay. So write to me, hefter.org. You know, that will get to me eventually. I've got some conferences coming up. I've got too many conferences, actually, but I've got... so there's one in Estonia, which the end of September, which most people won't be able to go to. Then actually, if you go to Facebook, if you're on Facebook and you go to Dennis McKenna public figure page or something, then there is there's an event at COSM at Alex Gray's place in upstate New York on the 28th of September. There's the Portland Psychedelic Society on the 26th, I think, of October. And then there's the one in Vancouver, November 2, 3, and 4. And also there's this psychedelic film festival.
Oh, cool.
In,
yeah.
October 1 to 7th, I think. So I'll send you links for all those things.
Great, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to end with a question, and it's something that's been bothering me, is how can people get involved and help out with kind of maybe helping or speeding along the process of psychedelics being legalized, or, you know, how can they help in the communities, things like that? What are some ideas maybe that you can give people to kind of make a difference like you have?
Oh, well,
I know it's a big question, man.
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't think people, you know, I think people find lots of different ways to do it. I mean, there are many people out there spreading information, and some are doing research, either authorized or unauthorized. A lot of people are, a lot of people are visiting South America, and it's not entirely negative. You know, I mean, now there are communities there where you go and you can stay there for a while. You don't just go for a retreat and then leave. You can stick around and work with the local people on permaculture projects and things like that. Everybody seems to find their own way to do it. And then of course, there's the academic route, you know, which works too, but it's not the only approach. I mean, if you want to study psychedelics, say clinically or from the standpoint of basic research, either ethnobotany or neuroscience and whatever, then you really have to go through the academic route, because that's what's allowed, but then that's a huge, it's a huge commitment of time. I mean, to go from undergraduate through to PhD or MD, that's going to be 10 years of your life. But then on the other hand, what else are you doing?
Might as well do
So you
something
can't
drastic.
True. True.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much for spending time with us. I really appreciate it. You're one of my personal heroes. So it's been a big honor to have you on the show and talk to you. So thank you for your time. And also thank you for all the work that you've done throughout your life, because that's not something that to take lightly. So
Great.
this episode of Cosmic Echo is brought to you by Synergetic Press. If you'd like to learn more information about Dennis McKenna and his work, you can visit our website at tailleaders.com/CE podcast. Additionally, if you'd like to support this podcast, you can do so through our donation page, located at the same website. We look forward to bringing you additional episodes in the near future, but until then, happy dreaming.